Over the last few years, for many people, there's been a desire for something. In our social media, our gaming habits, in the way we decorate our homes. A desire for something slower, simpler. A fantasy of escaping the noise of modern life and retreating to an imagined countryside. Baking bread, growing herbs, wearing linen, and living in a cottage so quaint it could double as a mouse's house in a children's book. And as with all these movements, we named it Cottagecore. And during the chaos of 2020, it became a global obsession overnight. But Cottagecore didn't appear out of thin air. Its roots stretch back decades, and the reasons why we loved it and why it faded tell us a lot about where we are now. Today we're tracing the full story, the life, death, and lingering ghost of Cottagecore. Cottagecore, broadly speaking, is a romanticization of rural living. It celebrates domestic skills, natural landscapes, and a slower, more intentional pace of life. Visually, it's defined by soft earth tones, natural fabrics, vintage styles, and handmade objects. Emotionally, it's about retreat, a gentle withdrawal from the demands of modern life into a world of self-sufficiency and quiet ritual. In a cottagecore world, value isn't measured in productivity or profit, but in the softness of the light through the trees, the smell of bread cooling on the counter, the small pride of growing your own herbs. Lives are lived intentionally and moments are savoured. But while cottagecore might feel modern, tied to TikTok trends and Pinterest boards, the longing it expresses is far older. Before it got its 20s rebrand, cottagecore was already well established. In the 2000s and early 2010s, shabby chic and country cottage aesthetics swept through home design. Floral prints, distressed furniture, soft pastels, a curated imperfection that suggested a life lived closer to nature, but without the inconveniences of actual rural living. Brands like Cath Kidston and Laura Ashley captured this perfectly, selling not just products but a lifestyle, one that was nostalgic, domestic, and vaguely timeless. At the same time, gaming culture quietly offered parallel fantasies. In The Sims, players built cozy homes with libraries and gardens. Animal Crossing encouraged players to cultivate their villages, befriend their neighbours, and decorate endlessly without pressure. Harvest Moon and later Stardew Valley gave players the fantasy of leaving behind the city for farming, foraging, and forging quiet lives around shared rituals. These spaces, real and digital, primed us for what was to come online. It was like we all had this shared nostalgia for something we never actually had. In the mid-2010s, the seeds of cottagecore found fertile ground online, particularly on Tumblr. Tumblr, with its scrapbook collage-type format and accounts dedicated to curating particular aesthetics, was the perfect ecosystem for an idea like cottagecore to take root. Users shared images of moss-covered cob houses, handwritten letters, fresh bread cooling on farmhouse tables. Mixed in were quotes about slowness, self-sufficiency, and an almost spiritual connection with doing things by hand. Cottagecore became a visual and emotional language for a kind of yearning. For simplicity, for nature, for a sense of personal agency in a world that increasingly demanded speed and spectacle. Hustle culture was already well established, and demands on people's limited attention and time were high. The trend remained niche, just a small pocket of dedicated followers, until a global crisis brought those longings roaring to the surface. In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic forced millions of people indoors. Stripped of daily routines, social lives, and many of the external markers of identity, people turned inwards. Suddenly, the fantasy of self-sufficiency, of domestic competence, of a gentle existence felt less like escapism and more like survival. Animal Crossing New Horizons launched almost simultaneously with global lockdowns, offering players an idealized cottagecore fantasy island to escape to. Meanwhile, TikTok rose from the ashes of Musical.ly to become a new, faster vehicle for cottagecore's imagery, and people had all the time in the world to nurture new lifestyles to share. Tending gardens, foraging mushrooms, sewing their own clothes, and taking care of sourdough starters. Cottagecore exploded into the mainstream, not just as an aesthetic, but as a coping mechanism. But like any trend that grows so quickly, cottagecore developed cracks. Critics pointed out that the version of rural life it presented was highly idealized and at times highly exclusionary. The pastoral past wasn't idyllic for most people, especially not for marginalized communities who often faced hardship, displacement, and systemic violence. The fantasy of escaping modernity ignored the fact that for many, survival has never been optional, aesthetic, or Instagrammable. There was also the creeping influence of capitalism. Cottagecore spoke of handmade, slow living, but brands quickly found ways to monetize it. Suddenly, to live simply was to buy artisanal bread knives, designer overalls, and solid gold mushroom earrings. Fast fashion companies faked the look of needlecraft and crochet with print and knitting machines. Untreated twine and unfinished wood were rebranded and priced accordingly. People blogged their 3-hour luxury morning routines from their inherited farmhouses. It became another performance of authenticity, curated, expensive, and accessible primarily to those already privileged enough to slow down. Beneath the branding, something real persisted. For many, especially in the queer and neurodiverse communities, cottagecore wasn't just escapism. It was a form of radical imagination, a dream of domesticity reimagined as safe, inclusive, and chosen. A chance to create an intentional space that was cozy, take on the role of your choosing, and dress unapologetically. It inspired real movements towards self-sufficiency, mutual aid gardens, land stewardship projects, schoolyard allotments, seasonal eating trends, and a move towards natural and environmentally friendly materials. The true spirit of cottagecore, not as an aesthetic but as a philosophy, lived on even as the Google trends saw a dip. As trends shifted, cottagecore drifted out of the spotlight. New aesthetics like cluttercore and goblincore offered slightly messier, more chaotic versions of the same idea, and others like dark academia latched on to particular elements. Many of these trends stem from the same desire for belonging, for intentionality, for something outside of the relentless demands of modern life. Cottagecore in its Instagram perfect form may have faded a bit, but the emotions that powered it, the need for softness, for connection, for lives that feel hand-tended rather than mass-produced, are still with us. Cottagecore may have already peaked, trended, and faded into the background of internet culture. But its roots go far deeper than that and are entwined with the habits and lifestyle changes during the pandemic that will forever impact many of us. In every sourdough starter, every patch of homegrown tomatoes, every corner of a book-lined, cluttered kitchen, the spirit of it endures. A reminder that in a world that demands constant acceleration, there is still value, and maybe even a quiet rebellion, in slowing down.